Good morning. My name is Neha Sharma. I'm a data and AI solution specialist here at Microsoft, and it's great to have you guys sort of join this global conference and learn more about Fabric. I'm going to be particularly walking through some of the capabilities that we promised from Fabric. What does that mean? I'm sure you got some background earlier today on some of the sessions. And then I'll dive deeper into what a Lakehouse scenario looks like and essentially why we take that approach. So context setting. This is something that I'm sure you've kind of heard in the past, but I think it's very important to really kind of drill down on and understand why Fabric even exists. So current data landscape, let's dive into that a little bit. What you see in front of you is a common data architecture, right? So even if, let's say, you went with a traditional Azure infrastructure for your data platform in the past, what you would have to do is essentially you have all of your data sources and you have to move your data from ingestion to potentially taking that from raw data to data engineering to then going to, maybe perhaps enriching that data in some shape or form, storing that data in a lakehouse so you can actually start doing some of those things, and then serving that data at scale through an analytics or BI platform, right? Like Power BI or Tableau or some of the others. So all of this is sort of piecewise together. The data platform isn't necessarily unified, right? It's a lot of different subsystems. It's very fragmented. It's quite complex. There's a lot of different products that you have to kind of piece together to bring together an entire end-to-end solution for analytics. So that's the traditional way that things have worked. Even in our stack, if you remember, you'd have to go and take Data Factory to bring things into the platform. You'd have to use data orchestration, right? Pull data in from, let's say, on-prem to the cloud. ADLS Gen 2 is our data lake traditionally, and then you might want to land that in Azure SQL on Azure. So that's some perspective as to why there were so many different products and so many different vendors and why it was so much complexity and very expensive as well, because every single product would have its own storage format. So that's really good perspective to come into understanding sort of what Fabric is all about. Now, the other piece, just to set the context, is there's a lot of different silos that are created, right? Lots of duplication when it comes to data because there's a lot of data movement that happens internal to the organization. So we've got perhaps the IT team, the sales teams, the operations teams, and the marketing teams. All of these teams are required to report on their own insights, right, on their own data. And so there's a lot of data movement, and sometimes duplications can occur, right? There's edge copies of your data. It's not always a single source of truth. You might have one team has the most up to date, and then it takes a little bit of time to trickle down into the other teams using that data as well. So there's a lot of data movement, and there could be some edge copies and a lot of duplication that we need to remove in order to really understand what is that single source of truth for the organization. So as I mentioned before, normally what happens in analytics is you have two primary goals, right? So insights, tons of data that I need to extract the meaning, right? The second goal is to predict sometimes, oftentimes the future, right? So back in the day, right, let's take 2020. If I invest, and I was Satya, and I said, oh, if I invest $1 billion in OpenAI in 2020, well, how much, market share will it give me or allow me to capture in 2024? Those are the kinds of decisions that you're looking to make when it comes to analytics, right? So in analytics, it all starts with data and you have multiple different sources, and it often takes this similar journey. So you go through data integration, you go through data engineering, that's where you clean up your data. And then through data warehouse, perhaps if you've got any stored procedures, perhaps there's a schema, it's very structured data that needs to follow. And then there's also the capability of real-time analytics. And then we go through data science, and then there's BI to actually serve that reporting as well to the entire organization. Now, underpinning this is two key things that I think are very important: the data lake and data governance, right? So if you remember back in the day, there was a lot of analog storage, right? That went away completely when there was a boom of digital storage. And then over time, we grew a lot in terms of digital storage, whether it's users, whether it's businesses. We had the social media boom, the internet. All of those things meant we had more unstructured data at hand than structured data. And so because of that, we had to move away from storing data into a data warehouse instead to a data lake. Now, instead of a data lake, right? If you remember sort of in 2020, what happened with Databricks, they launched the idea of a data lakehouse. And so that was super, super key to really getting us started with all of that data coming into a lakehouse concept, which means that you've got data warehouses and you have a lake that also can take into account your structured data, your unstructured data, your semi-structured data. So we needed to accommodate for all of these pieces. Now, I'm going to walk through some of the services and what they actually mean in Fabric, but we essentially took all of the comprehensive suite of products that we have at Microsoft, and we've seamlessly integrated it into each of these different pieces and brought it together under a single platform. So that's really what we've done. And so it starts with data integration, right? So for that, we have Azure Data Factory. For data engineering, we have Synapse, right? For data warehouse, you also have Azure Synapse. You can also use Power BI for business intelligence. We have a product for every single one of these categories already, and we've oftentimes been one of the best, right, at all of these. So if you look at past Gartner reports, this is not new. These are services we used to always sell, right? So what we've done is we kind of listened to our market leaders, we listened to our teams, and we said, a lot of the feedback we get is, I don't want to be a chief, integration officer, Neha, right? I want to be a chief data officer. That's what I do. I want to get to insights faster. So because of this feedback, we constantly get this from our customers, and we decided to launch Fabric. So Fabric is the answer if you want to minimize integration, you want to reduce costs, and you want to make sure that your end-to-end data platform is really a complete package, and it does everything it needs to, so you don't have to go through other vendors, you don't have to provision resources. And so it's really, really good to understand that context of why we launched Fabric and what that data state looked like prior to this. So streamlines all your analytics into all of these different components, comes together into a cohesive one-off solution. That's what Fabric is. And we really feel that this is the platform that you need in order to be ready for this era of AI, right? Because if you don't have your data in one singular place, how do you expect to leverage that data platform to then enable governance, right? To make sure that you have a master data management solution in order to go and build AI solutions. So really want to accelerate with AI, you really want to adopt that, you have to go back to your data landscape or your data platform and make sure that you've got your data, you have a single source of truth, you have sensitivity labels, you have a master data management solution, and you have data governance. So things like data catalog, data lineage. So that's really, really good concept to have. And this is why we launched Fabric. Now, I'm going to quickly pause there. I want you guys to watch a quick launch video, and then we'll dive into why Fabric is unique and go into some of each of the different services.
Microsoft Fabric is redesigning how we work with data by bringing all your data and analytics tools into a single experience. With Fabric's Data Lake, OneLake, your teams can connect to data from anywhere and all work from the same copy across engines. Your data professionals have all the tools they need, all in one SaaS experience to reduce the cost and effort of integration. Features like Direct Lake Mode in Power BI, which provides a blazing fast, real-time connection to your data, can save you time and cost while providing up-to-date insights. This intelligence can then securely flow to the Microsoft 365 applications people use every day to improve decision-making and drive impact. All backed by Fabric's tight integration with Microsoft Purview to govern and protect your data, no matter where it's used. AI-powered features like Copilot help everyone be more productive, whether it's creating data flows and pipelines, writing SQL statements, or building reports. And as we enter a future built on AI, you can unify, prepare, and model your data to support truly game-changing AI projects. All your data, all your teams, all in one place. This is Microsoft Fabric.
Awesome. So now that you've seen the sizzle video, I think it's really, really good to just understand what that user experience looks like, right? But Fabric, we believe, is unique in 4 ways. So why is this solution powerful? Well, a number of different reasons. The very first, like I mentioned before, it's a complete analytics platform, right? So everything is unified. And when we say that, we've taken that Lakehouse concept that was introduced back in 2019, 2020, right? And what we've done is we've essentially made sure that all of those services that we offered under the MS stack, instead of pricing it separately for you to have to monitor it, spin up services, understand, hey, if I run this query or this ETL process, how much is this going to cost me? How much is this reoccurringly going to cost me? That's always been variable. That's always been difficult to predict, to be honest, with a platform that you might be used to. So whether that's Databricks or whether that's going in and provisioning a Synapse workload, right? So that's what you've traditionally been used to. And for us, what we've done is we've essentially bridged that gap. We've brought everything together, built it into a fabric, if you will. We've knit it all together and we made everything unified. And the reason that was super important and the way we did it is because this is a SaaS solution. So it's not PaaS, right? Which is different. That's where you need to actually provision resources. You need to spin up a virtual machine. You need to measure how many cores are you going to assign to a specific performance workload or some sort of job that's running. That's not what this platform is. It's a software as a service. So just like Power BI, you have to purchase a single license and you can actually get access to the entire data platform, everything under the hood, from data engineering to data ingestion to storage to essentially getting it downstreaming to analytics, to running your machine learning models. All of that is unified. And because of that, it's also secured and governed. It's running on Azure, so there is built-in security already. There's built-in availability and all of that we've dealt with in the background. And the other piece is there's security pillars built inside, right? So there's things like domains. There's things like workspace access controls. There are things like making sure you have private links, private endpoints, that your data is secure. So a lot of that is now built into the platform. And that's why we say it's so powerful. And it's a complete package. It really is. Because if you compare it to anything else in the market today, what you're doing is you're buying something that does everything from data ingestion to storage to perhaps machine learning and even real-time analytics. But then that reporting piece, the BI piece, all of those pieces are still missing. There's nothing on the market that does exactly what Fabric does. So it covers all our bases when it comes to analytics. Now, the second piece, we talked a little bit about this, is lake-centric and open. So yes, Fabric is mainly a Lakehouse concept. We do have a data warehouse that you can definitely take use of. So if traditionally you have Oracle on-premise or SQL on-premise, you can actually bring over your stored procedures and take it to the data warehouse. So I think data warehouse doesn't get a lot of attention because everyone gets very, very excited about the Lakehouse or the OneLake in Fabric. We definitely still honor the data warehouse if that's what's needed. We also really, really encourage that we go with that Lakehouse, lake-centric concept. And the reason is when you bring data into Fabric, just like if you do with Databricks, what happens is we make sure that it's converted into Delta Parquet format. Now, what does that mean? With Delta Parquet format, what you have is an open format, and it's not proprietary to Microsoft, it's not proprietary to a different organization. It's completely open, and it has a lot of different principles, like it has efficiencies, right? It has ACID principles. That means you can actually track your data better. You have metadata assigned to it. And essentially, let's say a year from now, you decide and you're like, hey, I don't want to go with Fabric anymore. I want to go with a different data platform. You're not locked in. For SQL, for example, right? You need to know Transact SQL to be able to deal with that data. You don't need to do that with Fabric. So as soon as you bring that data into OneLake, all of that is converted to Delta Lake format. So that is super Delta Parquet format. That's super critical to understand because that openness allows flexibility. It doesn't just allow flexibility for moving from Fabric to a different vendor in the future or perhaps even interoperability of services. It also means that because it's open at every tier, because you have everything in OneLake or a Lakehouse, what happens is, let's say that you have a SQL developer that wants to go leverage that data and work with it in Transact SQL. They can do that. If you want to use the same data in, for example, a Synapse notebook, right, or a Spark notebook, and you want to actually use Python or R or a different language, or you want to use Spark, you can do that. So depending on the role, depending on whether you're doing data engineering or whether you're a SQL developer or perhaps whether you're doing something else and running machine learning models and you want to use Python, you can do any of those things in any of those different languages, working on the exact same copy of your data at all times. because that format is no longer proprietary and it's not different for every single engine that you're trying to leverage and work on your data with. So that's super key. The other piece is empowering every business user. I touched upon it a little bit, but I want to give you some insight as to how this comes to life. So we really feel that the platform is built for every business user, right? So that means it's familiar, it's intuitive. If you're a Power BI user, let's start there. If you're a Power BI user, you're already used to what Fabric looks like. This is the same user experience. If you are, for example, leveraging notebooks currently in data engineering, well, we have notebooks built right in, right? So depending on your domain, you can actually set that domain within Fabric. You can assign roles and responsibilities to specific users. Let's say I'm a data engineer and I go into Fabric, I log in. I'll actually only see, or at least for the recently used or most used, you're going to see a view where you're going to need all your data engineering pieces or those engines. You're not going to see access to all the services. You can certainly go there, but that user experience is a lot more intuitive for depending on what your role is. We also try to get to insights faster. So again, because it's integrated into the entire Microsoft stack, what you can do is if you have a report or you have an insight, something built out, you can actually go link it into things like Teams. You can get data where folks are working, right? So instead of going to the report, they can actually go to perhaps, Teams Copilot or Teams chatbot and say, hey, what is my sales doing today? That's exactly what we're trying to arrive at. We're trying to integrate it into all the different platforms. Um, so I'm just going to take Mark's question here. Does Databricks have the same capability to allow you to move to Fabric as easily as from Fabric to something else? Yeah, absolutely. So because they have the exact same open source format, right? Everything in Databricks is open source. It's Delta Parquet format as well. That means you can actually take that data and move it anywhere else. It's not proprietary. That's the beauty of kind of where this industry is heading. Now, the last piece here, AI powered. So when we talk about AI powered, there's a couple levels and tiers to what that means in Fabric. Now, with Fabric, we've got Copilot built in, right? And it's beyond a certain SKU. So you have to purchase F64 or above in order to get access to Copilot. But when you do, it's not just for Power BI, it's not just for a single user, it's not a pay-per-user license, nothing like that. It's integrated into the entire platform, no matter who you are. If you have access to Fabric, if you're working, let's say, on Data Factory, you've got access to Copilot. If you are working in data engineering, you have a Spark notebook open, you have access to Copilot. You can actually give it queries and say, hey, write me a query for this. If you're working on machine learning models, you can actually give it your queries or your machine learning model and say, hey, what other data or what other factors could I use to include in this model to make it more accurate, to make it better? Now, it won't necessarily have all of the data of what it is that you have available, but it will look at what are some other ways to make the model more efficient. So you can run things by it as you work, right? It's sort of your assistant as you start to adopt some of these different engines and technologies. The last piece, of course, that I know everyone gets excited about is Power BI. So you can get into Power BI, tell it that you want to build a report, and it'll give you a draft, and then you can start to really customize it how you want to view it and how you want to see it. So that's the very first level of why we say it's AI powered and AI built in, not bolt on, right? That's a little bit different. The other piece is GPT on your data. So we just launched AI skills. There's other ways to go about this. We have some ways that you can actually build your own GPT on your data, but now we have a service built in. So we actually have models built in with AI skills. And what you can do with this feature is essentially just, it's in public preview right now. So you can just turn it on. You say, hey, these are the data sets in my Lakehouse that I want to chat with, that I want to start to dig into a little bit further and start to arrive at insights. And you'll select your model and it'll pop up a chat screen. You can actually go and interact with it and sort of go, hey, what is my sales, or what's the highest selling product? Or perhaps I cover healthcare personally. So perhaps it's something like, what's the patient flow? Or what are the days that the patient flow is the highest, or perhaps times, right? So those are the things that it can actually give you the answer to. But not only that, it's going to give you the query. So it's going to actually tell you, for example, the SQL query to run. It's going to tell you the Spark query to run. So those are the ways that you can kind of interact. The other piece then lastly is you can go well beyond this and you can actually integrate with Azure OpenAI. We have some ability to integrate very, very quickly. So if you spin up an Azure OpenAI resource, you can actually start writing in your notebooks and leverage that, and you can start building your own sort of custom solutions and models. So that's another way to interact there. Now, one key feature of OneLake is shortcuts, right? So shortcuts span the entire data state, regardless of the data source, right? It can really be external or internal. And this slide has everything that's currently supported. So think about your Azure storage that you already have. If you have SQL storage in Azure, this is a great extension to that. You're not going to double pay. We're just going to basically call on that storage, bring it into OneLake. You don't have to build that ETL anymore. That's really the beauty of Fabric. Again, we got rid of all those integration pieces, those little hops that you would normally have to do, and it's removing that latency, right? So if you put, for example, if you build an ETL, hey, I'm experiencing some latency, I need to get my data from SQL all the way into OneLake, and then I need to do XYZ on it. Now it's just a straight link, and you just link it into OneLake. So that's what shortcuts are available for. We also support other formats. So if it's not in Azure SQL, if it's in Databricks today, if it's on Amazon S3, Google, Dataverse is that Dynamics data backend, right? So if you have any of those solutions where your data is currently, we can actually absolutely link it and bring that data already existing in Azure or other clouds without any data duplication directly into OneLake. And that's really the key, right? So no duplication is what we're trying to achieve here. If you duplicate it, the risk that you're running into is latency, copying, you're going to have to stage that data, creating multiple edge copies. That's the piece that we're trying to avoid, right? That's why we want to unify everything in the OneLake. Now, with Fabric, we connect all those gaps I mentioned to you, right? From data movement to engineering to science, insights, all in one place. And this is essentially the breadth of the solutions or services or engines that are available. So we call them runtimes. I'm not sure if that's something you're familiar with, but Fabric has 7 different runtimes, right? So we've got all of these components that make up essentially the breadth of data movement in Fabric. And it's really beneficial for all domains. We talked a little bit about this before, but there's ability to essentially set aside workspaces so that if you're used to or have thought of in the past data mesh as a concept, right? So you can actually set domains within Fabric to go, hey, this person here works in sales. Let's create a workspace for them, right? This person here is actually ads or marketing. Well, let's create a workspace for them. So it's a logical grouping of all of the data in the organization so that you're not creating a swamp. You're actually giving it some structure and relevant field or area, some context so that anyone who has that business need is actually able to log in and have that user experience be very intuitive for them, right? So that's essentially what we believe is a really good best practice when you're actually coming into Fabric and setting up some of your data in OneLake. Now, domains do provide that management boundary between the tenant and the workspace, right? Enabling all of your admins to actually have more granular control over all of the different multiple workspaces. And so later you can actually simplify discovery and consumption of the data across your organization because you don't want users from different teams to have access to everything in the Lakehouse. You want to have everything in the Lakehouse, but you don't necessarily want everyone to have access to it. So this is where you're going to have an admin essentially be that central gatekeeper by giving certain users access depending on the domain that they're in. I'm just going to click through here to a demo super quick. So it's just a quick, video demo that just sort of on a loop that repeats, but I wanted to just show you, for example, if you're in sales, you have access to the data sets below, you can go and change your domain, let's say finance, and then your data sets below change according to that. So that's essentially how we're saying that domains will come to life and why that user experience would be super easy. Now, when it comes to visualizing, and all of these key components, by the way, are super important before we get to those end-to-end Lakehouse scenarios, right? Or the capabilities. But essentially understanding what the value prop of Fabric is. But when it comes to visualizing your data as well through Power BI, traditionally you use import mode and you use direct query mode, right? Those I'm sure you're already very familiar with. So direct query is essentially where you query the data at the source. It avoids being slow, but it avoids data duplication, right? It has a direct link to that data. Import mode is actually data is cached, it's optimized for DAX queries, and then new data is actually copied during every single refresh. Now, with Direct Lake, it's a little bit different. So it's actually based on loading those Parquet files that I had mentioned to you before that are in your Lakehouse directly from Direct Lake without having to query a Lakehouse endpoint and without having to import it, without having to duplicate your data into Power BI. This is super, super powerful. And this is actually one of the reasons a lot of our customers for this feature alone are purchasing Fabric because it's a fast path to loading your data into the lake or from the lake straight to Power BI for analysis. Now, why is this super, super helpful? Because it creates a semantic layer. So when you do direct lake mode, what it's actually doing, and when I was able to get my hands on this, I investigated. And so it's reducing that integration time because it's creating that semantic model for you. So when you have that lakehouse data, it's always in sync, right? Instead of using that traditional import or query mode, it's actually going to dynamically switch between whatever is optimal. But let's say that you use the direct lake mode, it has all of the flexibility to, you can use that semantic model that's built, remove, add tables, modify what you need to, and then just publish the report. So it's really removing all of the process that the integration time that you're used to. Now, historically, right, I mentioned before as well, many data analytics tools were proprietary, which is why we have such high costs for businesses. So when we get to pricing it out and understanding Fabric, really, really note that the reason we're able to bring it so low is because single platform SaaS solution, right? In the past, if you know anything about like statistical analysis system, right? Like SAS, that's what I mean by SAS. It's a software suite of advanced analytics BI, and you would need to purchase a license, right? Comes with a very significant licensing cost. I still have customers using SAS today. And now you see that evolution, right? We actually have gone through a significant evolution from proprietary languages to open source. And over the past 2 decades, there's been a significant shift towards open source technologies, not only because they're really robust, especially at handling big data analytics, but also because there's so much practice and field feedback that can be provided. There's so many individuals that can go and guide you on how to optimize, for example, your lakehouse or optimize your queries. There's a really large community that can provide a lot of support and essentially, help to unravel any of the issues that you might have. So that's really a big driver. So example of this you're probably familiar with, but a lot of folks just use it on their own laptop is just, of course, like Python, R, right? They're both open source, hugely adopted in the industry. But now this is getting to the granular of format. So the data format is now open source, right? And that has a lot of benefits. So cost effective, there's a large community support, and it's flexible, and there's a lot of room for innovation, right? Lots and lots of room for innovation. Awesome. So let's consider a lakehouse scenario then, right? And this is what you'll normally see. I can show you a data warehouse scenario after this, but I wanted to just make sure that that we look at this at a high level and dive into maybe potential scenarios that you might come across. So when you look at that lakehouse scenario, everything starts with the data sources, right? So number of different data sources. For me personally, I work with public sector customers and healthcare customers. So you'll see EHR systems, right? You'll see EMR systems. You'll see your essential traditional healthcare stack that maybe is perhaps on-premise, SQL servers, Oracle servers on-premise. There's a lot of different places that data can come from. If you're in real-time intelligence, right? If you're a logistics company, you might have IoT sensors. You might have sensors across airports, right? I also cover airports. So a lot of different data sources, and all of those different data sources are either coming into Fabric through three main features. So either data factory, or you're going to enable a shortcut or you're going to enable mirroring. Now, mirroring is essentially not a shortcut. Shortcut is a link to the data. Mirroring is actually going to bring the data in. It's constantly bringing the data in. It's actually a duplication of your data. So it's going to bring it in, and it's storing your data in Fabric natively. So it's actually creating a copy of the data. That's a little bit different. But just note that we support all three of those capabilities, and depending on the type of data and where it's sitting today, you're going to want to use all three of those features. So either data factory, shortcuts, or mirroring. That's how you get your data essentially into Fabric. Then you want to create some sort of data flow, right? You want to create a data flow. You want to ingest that data. Perhaps that's pipelines, data flows. You want to bring it into the Lakehouse, okay? From there, you're going to either use notebooks or data flows to transform that data. I've seen notebooks been used widely, so we're going to, let's say we use that approach. And then from there, we're going to expose that data either to a lake warehouse or Power BI, depending on what you need to do with it, right? So maybe it sits in Lakehouse, you go through a couple of rinses, and then it's super structured data, has a schema. Maybe you need to put it in a warehouse to do additional tasks on it. Maybe you want to do machine learning or enrich the data in some form. That's how I would approach it. Or perhaps it's ready to serve. So you go straight to Power BI. Any questions on this specific Lakehouse architecture? It's very high level, so we're starting here, but any examples or even questions from maybe the architecture or sources that you currently have? Any questions there? Awesome. We'll explore all the different types of Lakehouse scenarios depending on whether you want to do real-time intelligence or data science, but this is really the basic of end-to-end analytics when it comes to that Lakehouse scenario. The other piece you want to keep in mind, and it's something that I'll probably mention as well, is in that Lakehouse, you want to make sure you're following that medallion structure, right? So when you're coming into a Lakehouse, a medallion architecture, if you haven't come across it already, is essentially bronze, silver, gold layer. Okay, there's 3 layers of data, and the bronze layer is the absolute raw data as is. The reason this and the silver layer is helpful, the silver layer is when you've done a little bit of data engineering, you've cleaned up perhaps duplicates, removed missing values, whatever it is. So data engineering has been done, that's silver layer. And then gold layer is everything that needed to be processed. This is the cleanest form of data you're going to get to, and it's ready for reporting. That's the gold layer. So bronze, silver, gold. That's what you want to follow. That's a medallion architecture. And essentially from bronze and silver, the reason these are important is if you're building AI models, if you want to run AI on your data, it actually needs bronze and silver. It's not going to work super well on gold layer. So when you're thinking about AI use cases, think about the bronze and silver data, data there. And then when you're thinking about gold layer, that's simply for analytics, is the cleanest form of data that you're ever going to get. That's for reporting purposes only. So that's a background there. I see a question in the chat. I see a hand up as well. So I know the mic and the video is blocked. If you could just put your question in the chat for the individual who has their hand up. For the question in the chat, difference between mirroring and shortcuts. Yeah, so shortcuts is a direct link to your data source. Mirroring is actually bringing the data into the Lakehouse. That's the difference. We have different capabilities depending on where that data sits. So shortcuts today is enabled for Dataverse, Azure SQL, ADLS Gen 2, Amazon S3, all of those different sources. For mirroring, we actually have the capability of bringing data in from Snowflake, for example, or Azure SQL as well. So really depends where that data is today. Let's move on here to the data warehouse scenario, and then I'll get to some questions at the end as well. Data warehouse is a little bit different, right? Takes existing sources that are, maybe mounted into Fabric. Then you create pipelines, data flows. That's where you bring in all the data that's needed. And then essentially what you can do is you can then define and store procedures to transform the data, which is stored as Delta Parquet again, right, in OneLake. And then from there, your business users can go and visualize that data. Again, because we talk about the Lakehouse so much, What happens is a lot of customers don't know that we also have a data warehouse capability in Fabric. So this is just something to consider and for you to know that we have this capability and this is how that data flow would look. I see some questions popping up, so I'll definitely get to that super, super soon. Let me navigate to the next slide here. Let's walk through each of the different scenarios and then I'll get to some of the questions. So data science analytics scenario, this is a little bit different as well, but very similar to what you've seen, right? So essentially what you're doing, you're bringing that data in, exact same concept, but let's say now that you're either in the Lakehouse or your data sitting in the data warehouse, what you do is go to notebooks, right? And you'd go and clean and prep that data. And then you'd want to store it back as that copy. Maybe this is the silver layer, right? This is what I was mentioning. So maybe this is a silver copy of that data. And then what you do is train, test, and apply your models and experiments, right? So it's clean, stored, and then machine learning models can then be trained and tested directly in the Lakehouse. And then you've got, other analytics scenarios as well, where business users can just analyze some of those data points, for example, directly from the Lakehouse, or perhaps once that machine learning model is ready to serve. And then very last scenario here is real-time analytics. So real-time analytics is probably the one that I'm very excited about. And when I say real-time, a lot of customers get confused. This is not real-time analytics as to, hey, I'm reporting all of this data at a less than 5 minutes or less than 1 minute reporting. That's not what we're talking about. Real-time intelligence, real-time analytics for us is actually getting data from things like IoT devices, event streaming, right? All of those things, pipelines, data flows. We want to make sure you're using Event Hub, right? That is real-time analytics for us. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about this. Everything else, when it comes to reporting and how fast you can do it, those pieces are built into every single other Lakehouse scenario. So that's a little bit different. So unlike data science, Lakehouse, data warehouse analytics scenarios, this streaming data can actually be ingested into Microsoft Fabric in several ways, right, to achieve real-time analytics. And you kind of see that here. Users can actually leverage things like Event Hub. You're probably familiar with that already. IoT Hub, pipelines, data flows, notebooks, open source products like Kafka, right? A lot of my customers ask, hey, I'm on Kafka right now. Can I leverage that? Absolutely, right? Absolutely. Once the data is ingested into Microsoft Fabric, the streaming data now is then stored in a CustoDB or a database. It's then mirrored into the Lakehouse. And then from that point, that data is you can run machine learning models. They can be trained and prepped and tested directly in that Lakehouse, like I mentioned before. And then you have other scenarios where, again, you're serving that up to the business users right away from that CustoDB. So depending on what angle you want to go, this is what a traditional data flow would look like when it comes to real-time analytics. Awesome. I'm going to pause there. I'm going to take some of the questions that are popping up in the chat. So I see that someone here, Gauri Prasad, has mentioned if you're on Azure using Azure Data Factory, ADLS Gen 2, Databricks, do you suggest migrating to Fabric? And if yes, how do we migrate? Okay. If you're already leveraging some of our services like ADF and ADLS Gen 2, as well as Databricks, you probably want to consider just coming under a single platform. Now, here's something that you want to consider. What are you doing for reporting and analytics, right? This is all the back-end stuff that you're working on. So you're bringing data in, you're leveraging the storage and the data lake in Azure. You have Databricks running as well for some of your queries. I'm assuming you're doing that for machine learning and some other workloads. Absolutely create an approach where maybe over a certain phased approach, you can actually bring that data into Fabric, build sort of a unified platform, right? So right now, perhaps your data is sitting in multiple different sources. So think about what you're trying to do for analytics. If you're using Power BI along with all of these different services, absolutely go with Fabric. Absolutely. There's not a doubt in my mind that it would actually be cheaper for you because you're already using two of our services, right? So you're using ADLS, you're using the Lakehouse, you're using ADF, you have Databricks. I would recommend just making Fabric your default. What I would recommend to start out and how you actually approach this is take a look at the data that's living in your ADLS Gen 2, take a look at the Databricks data. If there's any duplications or copies, or you know that you can bring data into one or the other, just go all in on one platform. So either that Lakehouse or the Databricks, and then create a shortcut from Databricks into OneLake, turn on Fabric, and you're going to get everything from reporting. Get rid of the ADF. That would be my first recommendation, and just use the ADF abilities within Fabric. So that's how I would essentially approach it. So the other question was around where does data modeling fit in, right? Is it the gold layer? I would say data modeling is absolutely the gold layer. Again, the gold layer is the cleanest form of data for analytics. So you're starting to model and you're starting to go, hey, this is what I want to serve to the entire organization, or perhaps it's even, here's a data that I want to use. It's the cleanest form. The data modeling aspect, perhaps you mean like just refining and optimizing your data just for reporting. Absolutely. That's what the gold layer is all about, right? So you want to make sure that all of that is done. If it's more data transformations like cleaning and filtering, then that's actually more the silver layer. So think of it that way. So aggregating data, cleaning it, filtering it, making it a little bit more accurate. That's more data transformation. That's on the silver layer. The modeling piece is a little bit different. It's like identifying measures. It's, data entities. It's setting up the hierarchy for the data. It's making sure that you know where to go. That is all absolutely the gold layer. It's ready for reporting. So question from a healthcare perspective, just reading this here. The connection to Fabric, would there be a direct source to target the bronze layer, or would you have another type of solution? That's a really good question. I'm actually going to have to circle back to this one because just given like best practices, I'd have to run through it. But that's a really great question, Daniel. Thanks for asking. If I have my my technical specialist that I can run it by, then I'll definitely get you the answer before the end of the day today. How are shortcuts different from direct query? Direct query and shortcuts are very different. So shortcuts essentially are a link to the data that's sitting external to the Microsoft stack, right? Or perhaps just Azure SQL maybe is the one shortcut that is within the stack. But let's say it's sitting somewhere else and you want to link that data, you want to reference that data, maybe it's on Amazon S3 buckets. That's what a shortcut is. It's a link. Direct query is for Power BI. It's not necessarily what we're talking about when bringing data into the Lakehouse. So think about direct query happening with Power BI, and shortcuts is a link to bring data into the Lakehouse. That's the difference. And direct query is a direct link to that data source. Yes, absolutely. But it's for Power BI specifically. So that's a little bit of the difference there. Another question was around MS Fabric. Is that default? Is data mesh essentially the default experience of Fabric? It's actually not. It's enabled through things like domains, right? So you can create a domain in your Lakehouse and say, hey, these are the data sources that are for sales. These are the data sources, for example, for marketing. These are the data sources for the business leaders. But it's not traditionally data mesh. Like it's not by itself. You would actually need to set up domains in order to have that data mesh experience. So direct lake mode has lots of limitations, like only tables can be used, calculated columns, tables can't be recreated, right? Yeah, you're absolutely right. RLS, is there a road path to support these features? There is. So we are working on making direct lake even more robust. For now, you're right, it does have some limitations, but that's also why we've kind of built in that default switch. So if direct lake mode can't do something, then it's going to default to direct query, right? So you're absolutely right. And do we need additional licenses for streaming analytics, or is F64 capacity enough for this scenario? It's actually included. It's enough for the scenario. Everything around real-time analytics or streaming analytics, right? Like all of those IT devices, bringing data in, event hubs, using all of that capability built into Fabric, right? So even that piece in Fabric, we now have data activator when it comes to these real-time scenarios. Think about data activator sort of monitoring any changes in your data. You can actually get it to flag, hey, temperature decreased from this freezing temperature as we're shipping off vegetables in this truck. The temperature decreased. we need to now change that temperature, or somebody needs to be notified. Or perhaps your speed is going too high when you're in a logistics organization where you have like 400 trucks. Perhaps the driver is exceeding the speed limit, right? How do you monitor that, and how do you notify the driver to actually bring their speed down? You can actually do that as well. That's data activator as well. If you're actually looking to interact with the IoT devices, that's within Event Hub. That's a little bit different. I'm talking about a different feature called data activator. So all of these scenarios absolutely are built into the price and the capacity of Fabric licensing. Awesome. Lots of great questions. Maybe I'll come back to some of them as we finish up here. I want to make sure we get to the rest of the content. So let's take a look at a quick demo of sort of what direct lake experience in Fabric looks like. So I'm going to play this video.
Next generation AI in Microsoft Fabric empowers you to unlock the full potential of your data. With Copilot integrated into every data experience, Microsoft Fabric lets you use natural language to bring your data to life. From integrating data to writing code, to finding insights and creating reports, new transformative AI experiences work alongside you every step of the way, so you can stay focused on getting value from your data. Copilot helps turn your words into data flows and data pipelines, so you can intelligently integrate data from anywhere. When writing code, Copilot automatically suggests code and entire functions in real time. And Copilot can guide you to create machine learning models to unlock insights in your data. Just by chatting with Copilot, you can visually explore your data to create stunning reports, discover insights, and summarize your data into easy-to-understand text narratives for sharing. With Copilot, you can turn insight into action with triggers that monitor your data and notify users. You can even create your own custom natural language experiences that combine Azure OpenAI models and your organization's data, and easily publish your creations as plugins. And with your data in Fabric, Copilot provides insights and answers everywhere work gets done. Most importantly, Microsoft Cloud runs on trust, which means your data always remains your data. Bring your data into the era of AI with Microsoft Fabric.
Awesome. Thank you guys for the time. I'm gonna leave it there. I will still have access to the chat, so if there's any questions I missed, I'll try and get back to that. But hopefully that was an exciting and informative session. Enjoy the rest of your day, and hope you guys have a productive day ahead.